Good evening, everybody. Glad you're here. Appreciate you joining us here on InsideCarolina.com and the Coast to Coast podcast. We actually are really excited to be here tonight. We're going to talk about some threads on the Inside Carolina message boards that have reached almost 750,000 views. That's really all we're here to talk about. No, I kid. You're listening to Coast. I'm Joey Powell. With me, as always, Sean Moran, Sherrell McMillan. It's been a busy month for Inside Carolina, and these guys have been grinding. Sean's been looking at tape. Sherrell's phone bill is through the roof. So I have no idea how I'm going to wrangle these guys, but the good news is they've given us some time to talk. Hopefully, this episode will not change as quickly as the last one we did, where we came to you guys and brought you some analysis of coaching candidates, and then within 12 hours, UNC had announced or had agreed to hire Hubert Davis as their candidate. So, man, we're trying to put content out for you guys and hope that it will hope that you guys will have time to listen to it before the shelf life burns on it. But either way, we appreciate you listening. If you wouldn't mind, take a second. If you like what we're doing, stop and give us a review, rate, all that good stuff. If you don't like what we're doing, again, two sides of that coin. Let us know. We want to know if we're doing things poorly. We want to do them better. And we appreciate you being a subscriber to Inside Carolina. If you're not a premium subscriber, make that happen. I don't know how you have lived the past 2 weeks and been a UNC fan without having that premium subscription to get extra access and the extra notes and news that these two guys that are joining me tonight bring, along with the rest of the IC staff. So make sure you guys take care of that. Rate, review, subscribe. If you're watching this on YouTube, welcome. We appreciate you being here. And with that, let's get off and rolling. Sean, how you feeling, man?
Doing well. A lot of updates and news to digest over the last week. But it's been a busy 3 weeks since the off season started.
Absolutely. And hey, I want to give you a shout out before we start talking about it. It was a great write-up you did on a young man that we'll be discussing here in a second, Justin McCoy. If folks have not read that on the Inside Carolina premium message boards, go check out the scouting report. It'll give you a lot more of an idea of who Justin McCoy, the player, is. Sherrell, hey, buddy.
Hey, how are you, sir?
Doing okay out there?
I'm all right.
Doing all
right.
Thank
you for asking. Yeah.
Man, did you get that? Did you get the care package I sent you of NyQuil and pillows?
Not yet. Oh, okay. Add some crab cakes in there, and maybe I'll accept it.
That works too. Man, listen, boys, let's talk about what's happened in the last 48 to 72 hours for Carolina basketball. And I think the biggest thing came last week when Hubert Davis made his first scholarship offer after being announced on Tuesday to Justin McCoy, a forward who was in the transfer portal, is local to Chapel Hill. I mean, if you want to count Panther Creek High School, relatively local to stone's throw from Chapel Hill. He had been offered by the Tar Heels during his original high school recruitment, but had been at UVA for 2 years. And he decided he was going to transfer to North Carolina. As we know, transfer portal this year a little different. We still assume, and Sherrell, correct me if I'm wrong, they have not passed the legislation. Correct, right?
Correct. They have not. They're not passed it, but CBS Dennis Dodd reported today that they're expected to either vote on it or discuss more, and voting on it later this week.
Okay, so we still have some movement towards what we anticipate here on the Coast to Coast and at InsideCarolina.com will be a transfer free or a transfer for a year, penalty free. Don't have to sit out, just transfer, and that would apply in this case with Justin McCoy. Sean, I alluded to it a second ago. Give me your breakdown of Justin McCoy, the player. I mean, based on his minutes at UVA, he didn't get a lot of burn. Folks can insert their joke about the pace of play at Virginia if you want to right there. I know you probably have 2 or 3 teed up, but explain to our listeners and our viewers what Justin McCoy means as a piece on the floor for the Tar Heels.
First, I think it's all about expectations. I think if you're looking at this particular one as a guy that's going to come in and right off the bat average 18 and 8, that's not going to happen.
Yes.
And is he one of the top power forward, fours in the transfer portal? No, but I think, before Roy retired, when we had the transfer listing going, I think the top two guys we had were both from Colorado. And then when Justin McCoy announced, had him pretty high up there. And I think there's a few reasons for that before getting to his game. But I mean, I think the one thing, the good thing in this situation is, we saw the growing pains the freshmen and sophomores had. And you look at this guy, he had, 11 minutes, 3 points, three rebounds. Like, nobody's going to get excited about those stats. But at the same time, here's a guy that has had the 2 years of growing pains already. So you're getting a situation where you don't have, for the most part, you don't have to deal with that. There's still a lot of, growth that needs to happen. But here's a guy, I think he would have started for UVA. I know they just brought in Gardner from ECU, but he was definitely, and once again, a lot of this stems from me just being bored one afternoon and watching the Miami game that UVA played. And I kind of alluded to it in the notes, but it was once again, it was a UVA game, so it was sluggish, low scoring. But they brought him off the bench and he provided a spark. Now, this is just one instant, but I remember thinking, wow, he's kind of that typical UVA guy that is progressing, starting to hit his stride, will play a little bit more, but then is going to be a real thorn in the side as a junior or senior. And once again, he hit 3 threes on the year, so he's not going to step out and just start, really stretching the defense like I hope everybody, which I think everybody hopes. But he can knock down the mid-range. He's proven capable of the three. He still needs some improvement off of that, but he's also a guy that I think can attack with 2 to 3 dribbles from the 15, 18 feet. So once again, I think that is more of the ideal big man that would be suited, knock on wood, if Armando comes back, kind of suited next to him versus, the 2 5s that we saw. So in terms of the scouting report, very good rebounder, quick off his feet, kind of a good mid-range jump shot. Still has a lot of improvement to go, but I think you're getting him at the right time. And I think he is a guy that can contribute immediately. He has kind of the strength and athleticism where he could, if need be, guard a 5, just with how basketball is trending. But at the same time, if you put him in the pick and roll, he can switch out onto the perimeter and is quick enough to guard that, where teams aren't going to try to ISO him and get him in mismatches because he can handle those. So once again, it's all about expectations, but I think he did his 2 years where he was growing, and now he's coming to Chapel Hill where he can hopefully have 2 years of being a strong presence.
I'm glad you mentioned his footwork on defense. That was something that I saw from your write-up on IC that was really good, because if we know anything, North Carolina's been exploited at times over the past few years in pick and pop situations where, whoever their big is has either not hedged very well or has just gotten washed up completely in a pick and roll situation. So I love that you mentioned his footwork and his ability to kind of get around those and stick with his man. I love that you brought up the trajectory with which he finished at UVA. And I don't want to say it just because he's a former Virginia player, but he kind of reminded me of Mamadou Diakite in a sense that they both had similar size, but Diakite really came on in what felt like his 3rd or 4th sophomore season towards the end of their year. And then before you knew it, he was there in year 8 and 9 and had become a really invaluable cog for what would eventually be a national championship team for Tony Bennett. And yeah, those two guys are similar in size. I think he's a little heftier than Diakite was, but I appreciate that. I do want to point this out too. Our boy Brian Ives are watching you, threw this out on Twitter. McCoy will be the first undergraduate scholarship transfer to play for North Carolina since Maktar Jai in 1995. Sean, you had something else you wanted back with that?
Well, one, that's a pretty, fascinating stat, just given prior to this year, there hadn't been a lot of transfers out, but there were really, there weren't any transfers in. So one, that's interesting, but two, in terms of what you were mentioning, Joey, probably not as quick off his feet as the UVA counterpart you were mentioning. But I think once again, he was the one that, got COVID. So he did play against Syracuse, but UVA had to stop their season and really at that point, and then he didn't play against Ohio. And I think if they had gone, they could have easily made it two more games to the ACC championship. And I think you would have seen him,
Mhm.
really get minutes as that, main backup 4 or 5 behind Hauser and Huff, and the guy who was bringing kind of a different skill set to that game or to their game. So once again, I think it kind of benefited where maybe he would have exploded a little bit more, and it would have been a little harder for him to get out. So once again, a lot is based on kind of projections, but I do think there's a baseline to make those projections.
Sherrell, do you want to share anything that you have about how the process went with regard to the staff reaching out to Justin McCoy and his quick commitment?
Yeah, it was. You said it right quickly. I think Tuesday night was Hubert Davis's first night after his introductory press conference. I think that's when the UNC staff kind of reached out, and then there was a subsequent call on Wednesday, and I think that Zoom call with McCoy really kind of pushed him over the top. Davis was familiar with him from high school. He played against his son Elijah in high school a good deal, so there was familiarity there. Obviously, they've played Virginia the last couple of years, and he's played some, so there's familiarity there. And then the fact that, like you both said, UNC recruited and offered him 2 years ago, there was familiarity there. So when he hit the portal, I think that was a kind, I don't want to say a layup, but it was an easy target for them just because of that familiarity. And I think that allowed it to move really, really quickly. Just being closer to home, a school that, his family has liked a good deal, and probably the school that finished second to Virginia the first time he committed 2 years ago. And I'll say this too. I know, Sean did a great job of kind of breaking down what he's been at UVA. But coming out of high school, he was very much the guy that or I always thought in my mind was going to be like when he got to Penn State, which is where he originally committed.
Mhm.
Like, how did UNC and NC State and Duke and Wake Forest let him get away? He had that kind of feel to him, and I still like his game. And I think what I like most about him, from a Carolina perspective, after talking to him, is the fact that he's not looking to come in and be the guy. He's not looking for 20 or 25 shots or anything like that a game. He's not looking, to get his and move on. He said he's looking for an opportunity to showcase what he can do. I know people don't like the word showcase, but in this context, an opportunity to do more, I think is what he meant, to be more versatile.
Yeah.
And then he wants to continue to win games because he did experience that at Virginia. So I think that is important for a locker room that is still going to be a little bit young and that hasn't really experienced a ton of winning. Not saying that UNC, hasn't wasn't okay last year, but they haven't experienced the winning like Virginia has the last few years. So I think that having McCoy experience with that and being around that culture can definitely help some of UNC's young players because it's still going to be a very, very young team.
Yeah, I also noticed too, Sherrill, in the piece you guys wrote after you got quotes from Justin McCoy, he mentioned that he felt like the Tar Heels were going to play fast and tough. Obviously, he sees himself fitting in a style more of that without knowing any more about how Hubert Davis is going to employ offense or what that's going to look like. Can you speak to that quote a little bit? Is there anything you feel like may have jumped out at you that listeners and viewers and Tar Heel fans can glean about potential style of play from Hubert Davis?
Well, he said he wanted him as a stretch forward, like Sean said. That's kind of the role they're pitching to him, in the role he's accepting. I think I take that comment and I relate it back to Gregory Hall's excellent story about the JV
Hmm.
team and players and coaches who are around Hubert Davis. One of the JV players, I can't remember which one it was, basically said that having the experience of being on JV and being on varsity, what they saw the difference between Roy Williams and Hubert Davis was is that Roy Williams was kind of more about execution of a certain play, and
Hmm.
Hubert Davis was more about effort. So I think you are what you emphasize, and I think for Hubert Davis, emphasizing effort is going to be a big deal, and I think you start to see that come through in that quote from Justin McCoy.
Gotcha. Well, I appreciate you clarifying that, and I think that'll probably help folks too. Just hearing that effort. That's one of the things that Roy Williams said a lot the last 2 years is that he couldn't reach those guys to get them to give the effort that he felt like they needed to do. So obviously, Hubert Davis at least will be prioritizing that early on. Um, and that's about it. There's not a ton to talk about as far as UNC additions or subtractions or transfers. No, I'm sorry, I'm kidding. I referenced at the top of the show nearly three-quarters of a million views on two threads about a kid that already had entered his name to the transfer portal, and then with what seemed like a pretty boss move at his introductory press conference, and I still think it is. Hubert Davis mentioned Walker Kessler by name, and just a few hours before we were recording this, Walker Kessler announced on his Instagram that he would be transferring to Auburn. So obviously, that's a huge win for Bruce Pearl and his staff. Uh, Walker Kessler, regardless of what you feel about the situation in Chapel Hill, is a very, very talented basketball player. Was probably the most highly touted, at least coming out of high school, recruit in the portal at this time. So, Sherrell, I'm going to just go to you first. I think a lot of folks were shocked to hear his name at Hubert Davis's press conference. And then whatever you're able to share, I know you just put something up on Inside Carolina as we've been recording this, but what can you share about how that transpired and maybe what eventually led to Walker Kessler deciding to go closer to home?
I think the first thing you can say, and maybe this is a higher level than just talking about Kessler, is that the Hubert Davis era, I think, from a recruiting standpoint, is going to be much more aggressive than we maybe initially thought. Just in hearing stuff over the last week and talking to people, that's been for me kind of the biggest revelation is that he's going after it, and he's not going to win all of them as we see today, but
Hmm.
he's going to swing. He's going to swing every single time. And to me, that was a bit surprising. And maybe that's unfair to him because of his demeanor. You kind of see on the sidelines,
Hmm.
you expect someone who's, gonna, I don't want to say conservative, but be safe in how they do things. But that was not the case with Kessler, like you said, from his opening press conference to calls to some things that happened on Thursday to more calls and some acquiescing on UNC's part and some meeting halfway and just a very different way of doing things than what UNC has done in the past.
Mm.
And it didn't work out obviously because he's going to Auburn. But I think the message I received from a lot of people was that he did a really good job and that there's really nothing more that UNC could have done to get Kessler back in Chapel Hill. So credit to him on that. You hate to lose a player as talented as Walker Kessler, but
Hmm.
we're sitting here recording this on Monday night, 3 weeks to the day that he announced his transfer. And if you would have said, 17 days ago,
Yeah.
UNC is going to be neck and neck with a school 90 minutes, 80 minutes from home for Kessler for his signature to come back to Chapel Hill, I don't think anybody really would have believed you. So the fact that he was able to bring UNC from so far behind and essentially pull into a tie with Auburn this late in the game, I think speaks highly of his effort, his staff's effort, and what UNC might be able to see on the recruiting trail moving forward.
Yeah, I want to make sure to hammer that home too. This isn't me necessarily, singing the fight song or cheering on, the party line or anything like that. But I think it's important for fans and subscribers to Inside Carolina to recognize that just because Hubert Davis did not get Walker Kessler to come back to North Carolina is not a loss or this big, huge black mark on his first attempt, right? Like this was a very unique situation that, as you said, Sherrell, 17 days ago was over and done with. So the fact that there was even a conversation to be had, and again, I still think it was a pretty awesome flex for him to make that mention during his press conference. I mean, that shows a lot of awareness and it shows a lot of tenacity that I think some Tar Heel fans may not have seen in quite some time. So just because the result wasn't what Tar Heel Nation had wanted, I don't think it should necessarily reflect as a full-on referendum about Hubert Davis and his ability to recruit. Sean,
Now,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say that, but the downside is, it is still about playing basketball,
Sure.
and Kessler was the number one rated transfer by Eric Bossi from 24/7 Sports. So I mean, he was the best transfer out there according to
Yeah.
Eric Bossi, who knows what he's talking about. And there just aren't Walker Kesslers in the transfer portal sitting there waiting for UNC to snag. So I think, again, looking from a high level perspective, I think UNC learned some lessons from this, and I think it's very instructive in how they're going to do things. But it does, it does hurt them for next year that they weren't able to land him. But again, just the fact that they came from behind and had a shot, I think, is a big deal. So I don't want to minimize the fact that he's not going to be at UNC next year. But
Sure.
I do think there are some positives to take from it.
That's a gap, and as soon as we get back from our break, we'll talk about the actual holes in the roster in a second. Sean, I did want to give you a chance here. Something that you touched on actually before we started recording today, and I think it was very enlightening. I'd like to let you elaborate on it about just how do you how do you come back from what was probably a tough situation? And as the Kessler said, he originally transferred specifically for basketball reasons. So, do you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think, going through the whole week of when it was first announced on Inside Carolina that they were re-engaging discussions with Kessler, up until today, where he went to Auburn, and you went through the hundreds of pages of threads where usually I'd sign on and it'd take me to where I was, and then I'd skip around and see what the mood was. But I think I never really, I think it would have been great if he had come. No question about that. I think in
Sure.
terms of even Sunday night, when it seemed that confidence was getting higher, it's still, to me, the fact that they left, and for Auburn or Gonzaga, whoever it may have been, it's easier to pitch the vision when you can just throw whatever you want out there, versus UNC. They can pitch a new vision with Hubert, but there was always going to be the thinking back to what had occurred, and to me it was just going to be too hard for especially the family to kind of get over that versus a fresh start. Once again, not really knowing them or anything about it, but that, in my opinion, that's just how I was thinking of it. And I think, once again, it'll be interesting to see how Auburn does do next year, because you have Jabari Smith, who is a true stretch four. So are they going to play five out? Are they picking and popping all the time? It'll be interesting to see. But I think at the end of the day, it's going to be hard to compete with just a new, fresh vision versus kind of an altered version of something new. So those are just my thoughts. And I think the one thing on recruiting, the concern, and we'll see how this goes out over the summer, but who are these targets that Hubert is going to lock in on? Are they targets? Once again, I think Roy and the staff did a great job of not really targeting players that weren't UNC fits, or we're maybe going to end up in the G League or overseas. But at times they did get stuck on the one and dones that, for the most part, you knew weren't going to be choosing Carolina. So is this kind of an example of that? Perhaps, but at the same time, it was a risk. But once again, it was wrapped up in a week, and at the same time, why not go after, as Sherrell said, the number one transfer on the market? So I think it's not great that he lost it, but at the same time, it was a risk worth taking. So I think, once again, we'll see how the future shapes up, and at the very least, it was just kind of reps that he's building in terms of the recruiting pitch that he wants to give. So we'll see.
That's a great lens, and I also want to point out too. I think Sherrell did a really nice job of putting this in summation about just it was tough to overcome all of the things that last year could have been, and then what last year ended up being. And that's not just basketball. That is very much a COVID and the Carolina atmosphere and so on. Sherrell, you had something you want to tag on there?
Yeah, to your point, I think there's probably 7 things that happened with Kessler over the last year at UNC. Won't go through the trouble of naming all of them, but I think if just one of them doesn't happen, he's
Mhm.
probably back in Chapel Hill. But all 7 of them happened. So it really was a confluence of just strange and unique, and COVID and away from home, and all this good stuff. And then I thought Sean had a great point too. Um, it's going to be pressure wherever you go, because you are, a top 20, top 15, 7'1" player who can do a lot of things and has a lot of skill. But
Yeah.
I think the pressure at UNC, if we're being honest, would have been a little bit different,
Every night.
because every night, every shot was going to be a referendum on, was Kessler right or was Roy Williams right? And it's a lot of pressure for a 19-year-old to kind of handle, kind of those two sides being pitted against together. Whether or not it's accurate or not, that's what was going to happen. That's what the perception would have been, was, oh, he went 3 for 10, Roy Williams was wrong, or Roy Williams was right, or he went 5 for 6, Roy Williams was wrong. And I don't think that's fair to either party, because I think it's probably a little more complicated than that. There's probably details that we'll never know, but I do think that kind of hung over all of this, was just how the public perception would be. And I mean, there would have been more pressure at Carolina, if we're being honest, and there is going to be at Auburn next year.
And hey, look, this isn't calling out anybody in particular, but if the last 72 hours have showed us anything, it very well could have been a situation in one half of basketball where, see, Walker Kessler was right, or see, Roy Williams was right in the same half, right? Like that's not necessarily a recipe or a level of water that anybody wants to try to paddle their boat in. Take a quick break. I want to mention our good friends at Johnny T-Shirt. Johnny T-Shirt is not going anywhere. Johnny T-Shirt is not entering the transfer portal. Johnny T-Shirt is sticking around through COVID, through pandemic. They don't need to stick in NCAA waiver exemption because Johnny T-Shirt is still a part of the Chapel Hill community and will be. And we want to make sure you guys are showing them the love. Hit them up, johnnytshirt.com. They have all of the gear. It's warm outside now. I have the air on in my house. I've been wearing shorts nonstop. Go ahead and go check out Johnny T-Shirt. Get your summertime beach gear, your summertime hiking gear. What are those really, really short shorts that Ross Martin wears? They have those, I'm sure. But hit up Johnny T-Shirt, johnnytshirt.com. Premium subscribers, you get your extra 10% off the top. So make sure to use that code. Make sure to patronize Johnny T-Shirt. Shop in store, curbside pickup, or online. Have them deliver it to you with the quickness. Either way, make sure you're taking care of Johnny T-Shirt because they take care of Inside Carolina. They sponsor this podcast. They sponsor just about all of IC's content. We love them, and we want you to love them too. Take a quick break and let the national guys drop some ads in here so that they can also help pay our bills. We will be back in just 1 second. We're going to talk about the current makeup of who is on the roster for UNC right now and what happens next for Coach Hubert Davis and his staff on the recruiting trail. We'll be right back in just 1 second. Hey, welcome back. Thanks for sticking around. We appreciate it. We want to now switch our view here on the Coast to Coast podcast on InsideCarolina.com. We want to take a look at who is on the roster for the UNC Tar Heels right now. What do things look like next year, and what's going to happen with regard to who's next to be sought out in the transfer portal? Are there other high school players that may be on the radar? Sean, I'm going to go to you first. We had talked about North Carolina needing another big. Hubert Davis has kind of professed, and you guys doubled down on that, like his activity next year is going to be less about a too big system, but they are going to need some depth in the post. What do you see as just kind of an instant, this is our shopping list for the North Carolina Tar Heels for next year? What are priorities 1 and priorities 2?
I think priority 1 is making sure that Armando does return, because I think if he does not, then it could be a long season where now you've gone from the 4 bigs to 0 bigs. And I think once again, Armando could easily have an all ACC, if not greater, potential next year. So I think that's number 1. I know it's kind of alluded, he's going to test and come back, but at the same time, all it takes is one agent or one team to make some type of promise, and now all of a sudden McCoy is your only big, and you haven't really hit the transfer portal that hard, and now you're running and gunning with a bunch of small guys. So that's one thing, and I think that's going to weigh over the program for a little bit. And then I've always thought that UNC has done great when they've had the three bigs that they can just kind of interchange. We saw that in Notre Dame where it was only 3 versus trying to do the 4. So is that adding another kind of 4 or 5 player to the mix? That would obviously help depth. We've seen Armando, if he does come back, get in foul trouble. Plus injuries, you never know what could happen. So looking for another 4 or 5 is I'd say high on the list. And once again, we've talked about, adding, a high level 3. It does not seem like they have really looked at doing that as of yet. And I think with UNC, they've been, which is also why McCoy was a great addition, because they're in a little bit of a tough situation where they do have a lot of guys returning. A lot of those guys will kind of have expectations in terms of role and playing time, versus some of these SEC schools that are loading up with Arkansas, for instance, they're loading up on the transfer portal, but they've kind of got in this other one and done where there's a guaranteed starting spot available for these positions, and there's really no depth. So once again, would love to add a 40% 3-point shooter that can attack as well, but it doesn't seem like they're really focusing on that. At the same time, there's 1,200 plus names in the portal, and there's some good ones for sure, but there's also ones. How will they adjust to Carolina? Adjust to a lot of adjustments to be made. So really, for me, it's can Armando return, and is there another big they can provide that can be an adequate 12, 15-minute guy?
Sherrell, I'm gonna go at you. I mean, are we assuming, at least Inside Carolina has been reporting that Armando is going to test, and indicators are that he will probably return. But throwing that, is there anything else that we're missing potentially as far as his situation goes? And then I'll throw the same question to you about the roster holes and what should be top of the shopping list.
I don't think there's anything missing, but done deals aren't done deals until they're done deals. So I would caution everybody on that. Um, and then as far as the roster is concerned, I think they have a lot of talent. I know because of what's happened in the last couple of years, people are questioning that.
Yeah.
But and we'll say it again for the 97th time, those guys were freshmen last year, the majority of them, and they're going to get better. They're going to improve. I think now Caleb Love it becomes even more important than he was before. This is kind of a situation where if Armando does come back, it's Caleb, it's Armando, and it's Kerwin Walton, kind of as the three leaders on offense, and then R.J. Davis, excuse me, and McCoy kind of help from there. But Caleb and Armando, I think, have to be the guys for UNC next season. And if they can continue to elevate their play, like Sean said, if Armando can be a first team All ACC type, and Caleb Love can, improve his shooting percentage a little bit and cut down on the turnovers a lot, then I think there's room for North Carolina to be a good team next year. Now they do have holes. I mean, right now, Leaky Black and Justin McCoy are the tallest players on the roster who are guaranteed to be there. So they're going to have to add some size, and there are 1,200 players in the transfer portal, or 1,300, whatever it is. So they'll find someone. But to Sean's point, it's just a matter of whether or not that player fits. Frankly, how good they are, if they're just kind of a placeholder for depth. All those things come into play. But I do think Davis and his staff will try and play to the strengths of this particular roster. We kind of things about their style of play are leaking out a little bit. We expected to be a little the same kind of up tempo, the same Carolina principles, but a little better spacing and maybe some small ball a little bit more. And I think this roster has a chance to be able to do that, well. But a lot again will depend on Armando and then what excuse me what else they can find in the transfer portal. So we know they need at least one more big, and I think from what we've heard, they also are still looking for a shooter. I know the backcourt is crowded and the wing seems crowded, but they still want somebody who can come in and shoot. So I think those are the things to look out for as they scour the high school ranks for someone who decommits or asks out of their letter of intent and the transfer portal.
I think it's important that you mentioned that. Yeah, the obvious depth issues are at the 4 and the 5 positions. But by the same token, and you hinted on it a little bit, and I want to make sure the listeners and viewers get this. If they're going to play a little small ball and you can get another scorer on the wing, you take that scorer
Right.
and let the other stuff sort itself out. I mean, we just got done watching an NCAA tournament where some of the, um, actually for this year and also 2 years ago, um, or whatever the last tournament was pre-COVID, you've seen teams that are a little better at not playing traditional style ball and running more of that, just 5 defenders running at you and just scoring however they can. So I think that's something that's important.
Think
Um,
about what they lost, Joey. I mean,
that's
Sterling Manley, basically a 7-footer.
yes,
Armando Baycott, may come back, may not. 6'10". Aaron Sharp, probably not coming back. 6'10". Walker Kessler not coming back. 7'1". Walker Miller, even though he wasn't a scholarship
7
player,
foot.
7 foot.
Yeah.
I mean, so they've I'm sure I listened. And Garrison Brooks, a center, longtime center, entered the transfer portal. He's 6'9". So I mean, they've lost just a lot of size. Like it's almost impossible to think like, wow, they lost
That's
6 guys.
42 feet of dudes.
Yeah, six guys who are 6'9" or taller. So they might not have a choice but to play a different style depending upon what happens with the portal and with some of the high school guys.
And who knows, playing a different style or just trying to go out there and put the best players on the floor and seeing what you can do might be good for a brand new coach in his first year, in his first season. Um, Guys, while we're talking about filling out the gaps on the roster before we wrap the show this week, who are the Tar Heels going to target next? I know there's been some talk about Jonas Idu, and whether or not he's a viable option, we don't know. There has not been an offer extended to him yet. Um, it doesn't seem to be any other high school folks out there. Sherrell, I know you mentioned, unless someone else asks out of their letter of intent, it just doesn't seem to be a lot of the class of 21. So I think that does leave the transfer portal. Sean, I know you did a great write up about 2 weeks ago, which, in Carolina basketball news time right now seems like it could have been 1977. But you did a good write up of some of the targets that were potential for North Carolina. How many of those guys are still uncommitted as of right now, if I can put you on the spot?
You are putting me on the spot. I don't know, but I know that
I'm a jerk
you know
like that.
I was the Colorado guys were the ones that I
Yeah.
personally was really liked and thought could be good fits, and they're gone. And then once again, McCoy was up there. I think Gardner was more towards the bottom of the top 10. But
he committed to Virginia earlier today.
He committed to Virginia. So I think it's going to be worth refreshing that. I mean, there's still some, I'd say, solid ones in there. I don't think there's a lot of difference makers at the 4 or 5 spots. But there's quality players in there, and I think once again I think it's slowed a little bit right now, but you're going to see guys that are testing the NBA waters, and whenever they get the news, whether it's late April, May, early June, whatever it is, maybe they decide, hey, I'm not coming back, or that maybe there's not a spot for them, and now there's a few other players that are coming into the mix, and then it becomes of how quickly can you adapt and do the research and target them. But right now, I mean, there's even when we were going through that exercise 2.5 weeks ago, it was almost a struggle building a top 10 of kind of fitting in. All right, here's a guy, Timmy Allen, great player from Utah, but most likely, probably ends up on the West Coast. Is it a fit at Carolina? So he'd be, a number one option realistically, but is there the fit? Probably not. So it was hard kind of going through that exercising and even finding 10 guys. And now you have, at least half, if not more, that have decided their schools. So it'll be interesting to see. But one last thing to add on kind of the potential roster for next year, I think, once again, it would have been great to have Kessler. It would have been great to see his improvement, but at the same time, you're still rolling out 2 true 5s, and you're still struggling on defense, getting put in pick and roll. So I think this will allow that creativity a little bit more from both offensive and defensive perspective, and still give some of those players a puff of RJ, Anthony Harris, that I think we all think have potential, but didn't really get to show it their freshman year. Put some pressure on them, but at the same time, it still gives them the opportunity.
So I'm going to play a little turnabout here. I'm going to play the role of Sherrell McMillan and be positive, but I'm going to ask Sherrell McMillan a question about some positivity and see if he might be able to play along for our listeners. Sherrell, new coach, new style of play, new system, also brand new potential way to get talent in this year's transfer portal situation with the waiver coming. Could that potentially open up some guys, combined with what Sean was saying about guys who declared now are waiting to see what their pro potential looks like, or guys that may still be considering transferring anyway? Is that something that where, in a month, 2 months, this could look better for North Carolina than the dire situation I think that everybody's sitting home and scratching their heads with right now?
First of all, I don't know how I got the rep of being the positive guy, but if you ever see me tweet,
because I'm on the pod next to you.
well, have you ever seen me tweet during Dallas like Dallas games. Like I'm the most negative person
You're a
ever.
different dude during Dallas Cowboys football. We all know that. We love that about you. Let's set that aside. Let's
Okay. All right.
compartmentalize your trauma in Irving, Texas, and let's talk about this.
So I think better might not be the right choice of words. I think different could definitely happen. But I mean, again, not to make a lot light of this, but Kessler is a really talented player. I know everybody's like, oh, 4.5 points a game and 3.5 rebounds, but there's a reason he was Hubert Davis's top priority from the
Yeah.
second he got the job. It's because he's really talented and he's really good, and he's seems like he's poised for a breakout. So I don't know if they're going to be get anybody better than that. I think what we've learned from Hubert Davis, and we talked about this earlier, was that he wants to play hard, he wants to play tough. Joey loves dogs, and I think
Our,
that's
our,
what Hubert Davis wants. So I think the play now for UNC is to try to find these good players, but also find guys who are hungry, find guys who want to prove themselves, not guys who are just coming somewhere to play for Carolina and get free Jordans and enjoy the lifestyle. Get people who want to come in and work hard, as the kids would say, hashtag grind, do all those good things. That's one of the reasons I think they like McCoy a good deal, because they feel like he's that type of guy. So you can win without. Baylor's proven it. Several teams have proven it. You can win without the top, shelf elite, top 10 talent is possible. But you can't do it if those guys aren't hungry, if those guys um, are comfortable. And I think what we're going to see with Hubert Davis is that him and his staff aren't going to allow guys to be comfortable moving forward. So if you can find two or three guys who are ready to roll, ready to work hard, then I think they could have a good, decent to good season next year. But it has to be the right guys,
right.
and you're going to. It's going to be there's going to be a talent difference, but you hope that the effort and the want to and all those things that sometimes can be cliche make up for the lack of talent relatively.
I know that there's not just this abundance of these dudes out in the portal right now, or maybe there are, and there's just so many names you can't really see them. But if there is a chance right now for this Tar Heel staff to go out and pluck one or two 6'5" to 6'6", muscular type dudes that have some absolute junkyard dog in them, that maybe they played in a middle tier conference, maybe they played in the MAC, maybe they played in the Big West or something like that. I know the Big West is kind of a reach, but I'm trying to make Sean feel good because he's in California. Okay, Sean, there's some Pepperdine love for you.
Hey, Pepperdine, West Coast Conference.
Maybe maybe we can find a couple of guys like that. I think that would be not only entertaining for us to cover here in Inside Carolina, but that's the type I think of team or want to that would really help a coach in his first year at a program at his first year as a head coach.
And
But
you have to kind of forget what you think you know about Carolina basketball.
yeah,
We know that Hubert Davis said he's going to build the program on the foundations of what Coach Smith and Coach Guthridge and Coach Doherty and Coach Williams did. However, we don't know what that next part looks like. Yeah, that's the foundation, but
yeah,
what are you going to change in the middle? So it could be a situation where he's perfectly fine with Armando as the 6'10" center is the one in, and then you have a 6'7" football player who's 6'7", 245 and is running over people. And then you have a couple of guards who can shoot. We just don't know. So I would urge everyone, because it's like, oh, well, they've got, one big guy and they've got McCoy right now if Baycott comes back. Maybe that's what he wants. Maybe he wants two big guys and a stretch four, and that's it. It's just we don't know. So I would caution everyone to just give it some time. He's been in the job for 1 week, like literally 1 week.
yes,
And I think it's very easy to say, look, he failed. He failed with his first recruiting pitch, to Walker Kessler. He was a failure. But again, I'm not trying to toe the company line or anything. And this is coming from people not direct, connected to UNC. But the fact that they were able to like come back in that recruitment, man, is a big deal, because it was done, signed, sealed, delivered. He was never coming back to Chapel Hill, and it was very tenuous. It was there was a strong chance that it was going to happen within the last 24 hours, and then things changed. So I think people should consider that when they start talking about Hubert Davis, his recruiting acumen, what's happened this first week. He went toe to toe, with a school that's closer, with a school that doesn't have the scars from this past season that Kessler experienced, and still almost won.
Look, I'm judging anybody who says that not getting Walker Kessler was a failure. I'll go on record to say that right now. If you're calling that a failure for your coach, then you're looking for something to be mad at. I got nothing else for you. Sean, give you a chance for your two pennies before we say goodnight.
But yeah, I mean, just on that, once again, it goes to Hubert getting that chance to be, the head coach and, give his vision, but it also gives Sean May, who hadn't been on the recruiting circuit, a chance to, once again, get some live reps. It'll be interesting to see how I think the coaching search is obviously going to be the hot topic for, the next week to see how that goes. And then, once again, it'll be interesting just to keep tracking who they're talking to and who they're reaching out to from a recruiting standpoint. Because I think, at least from a big man perspective, last year when we were doing the fits for all the players in this class,
Yeah.
It still could, you have the five-star players, but as NBA is trending, the big centers aren't, what everybody wants, but here you are. And it should be, even if Armando comes back this year, it should be open season, to be able to recruit a talented big guy for the next one. So gives them reps with Kessler, and still gives them the ability to create their own identity next year. So,
well, I appreciate you throwing that not quite totally skewed optimism, but objective view at the potential future for the Tar Heels. I like that. I like to wrap that. Sherrell, appreciate you being here. Get some rest, please. Sean, thanks for being here. I know you had a full day of work and are just now finally getting a chance to go get some dinner. So thank you guys for joining us on this episode of the Coast to Coast podcast. Big shout out to John Siegley for producing. Thank you all for watching. If you have not, rate, review, subscribe, all that good stuff. Shout out to Johnny T-Shirt for sponsoring. As always, I am just Joey Powell. For Sean Moran, for Sherrell McMillan, we will catch you next time on Coast to Coast. Late.